Welcome to the second of my videos regarding my first GW's Blood Angels armies. This time around I have a 5-man Terminator Squad, a Landraider and some of my Dark Vengeance minis. To start with the Terminators, these were the first of my minis that I started painting using an airbrush. As an airbrush novice, I have to say I was extremely surprised how easy and comfortable it was to use it. It was extremely fun to paint the models with it. It made me paint quicker because I enjoyed painting with it a lot more than with my standard brush and pencil setup. So it was quite good for me to make the change over, because I don't think that if I would have stayed using or continued using a standard brush, that I would have really continued with the hobby, because I was comparatively fed up with trying to get a somewhat decent looking color paint job on the models with the normal brush. These 5 Terminators I painted using standard GW paints that I just thinned down a little bit to shoot it through the airbrush. Surprisingly for myself, it worked pretty good. The coverage of the model, although they are all undercoated in black, is pretty nice. There are hardly any black spots from the base coat showing through, so it really worked out a lot better than with my normal brush skills. And also I was finally able to do at least some highlighting of the top of the model to give it a little bit more vibrance in the colors instead of the normally rather dull hand paint job. To try and break up the large red areas, I then decided to go with blue helmets, which isn't 100% fluff, but at least it works quite well. From a posing standpoint of the models, they aren't really posed, they're quite standardized, so it's not very visually exciting to look at them. But at least for the beginning it worked out quite well to build for me, so I went with a rather safer option here in terms of the building. I noticed when painting the models, when I had to switch over to my brushes to do some of the finer details, that unfortunately some of my paints were just too old to properly be able to be used, because they have gotten really dry, so it was quite hard to get them out and then use them properly. Main problem I had with the white, so the whites don't really show as nicely, but here I want to go in at a later point in time and do them up. I hope it will be possible over the varnish, but I think it should be doable to really bring them out a little bit more, the details that are available on the model. Also, what I forgot to do on the model, which unfortunately happens quite a lot to me, is that I didn't drill out all the weapons holes, but at least this will be quite easy and fast to fix. After finishing the Terminators, I then switched over to another larger model, because I found out that larger models for me as a beginner are a little bit easier to work with, so they are also a little bit more enjoyable to work with. And because of this I got myself a Redeemer. Again, of course, it is a very large block of just red color, so it's not visually the most interesting piece to look at, but at least for me as a beginner modeler and builder, it was quite a good experience to do it. From a building perspective, my main two problems, one you can slightly see here, is that I didn't have enough clamps on hand to really push the pieces together while the glue was setting. So I have on some pieces a little bit of gaps in here that aren't nice to look at, but it's okay. The piece isn't falling apart, it's holding quite nicely, so no rattling or anything. I will live with it, but for the next time, if I build anything larger again, I really need to start looking into getting some clamps to hold the parts together. My probably biggest problem during the build I had, because I went for the forge vault, side doors and front hatch. While the front hatch fitted quite nicely, here on the side doors I had to do a lot of filing down the hinges and also pressing it quite hardly so that the glue had a chance to hold it down. So the doors for me were a problem just because the resin didn't fit properly to the rest of the model, which is a real shame because from a optical standpoint I really like them. It's just that I'm not 100% convinced that the effort to fit them in really is worth it. And also, compared to the rest of the model, they are quite expensive, considering you only get 2 side doors, 1 front hatch. If you put it in comparison to the rest of the model, it doesn't seem really to fit from a price point. But the paint job on this model was now done using Vallejo Model Air colors. So from a building point with the airbrush, it worked very well. The Vallejo colors covered the base coat extremely nicely, so it was very easy to get a very unified and clean look on it, which I have to say I really like. The model itself is a little bit darker than I would have liked it, so the colors took a little bit too long to really settle into their finished real color. So I might try and go over it with a lighter red later in time to just liven it up a bit. But for the moment I have to say I'm not too unhappy with how it came out. I'm sure a lot of people can do better, but for the moment I'm pretty satisfied with it. Also I like how the gold came out on the doors with the little green emeralds on it. But yeah, I really like my Landraider. There are still quite a lot of problems with it, mainly in terms of how the color set after I applied it. So here I really need to work a lot more on understanding how the Vallejo colors work, because I expected it from the wet look to be very light, and afterwards I suddenly realized that it's getting too dark for my liking. But at that moment in time I decided to just run with it, see how the end result will look, and then decide how to continue. For the moment I will keep it in this way. But yeah, I think in 1 or 2 months I will try to revisit the model and then maybe go with a slightly lighter color scheme. The guy on the top, no, come, focus a little bit, worked out surprisingly well for me. It's still everything quite dark, so you could say I made a judging error here of how I use the colors, but I think I can rectify it where needed. And at least on this model I didn't forget to drill out the weapon holes. So at least something I did remember to do. What I learned with the model, however, is that the Vallejo Model Air, some of the colors are just too thin to be really used well for smallish details with the brush. So I tried to paint here the lights yellow with the Model Air colors. Not focusing too well. It worked, but it took a lot of effort. So there I have to use something different. I'm not sure if it will be GW for the future or one of the other color producers, but here I think it works quite well. Overall, the model, from a building standpoint, I liked it. It was big, it was chunky in comparison to the others, so it was for me as a beginner rather easy to set together. Sure, I had a problem with missing some clamps to let the glue cure properly, but that is something that can either be rectified by holding it by manually together or by just getting some clamps, which I don't think should be a big problem. The paint job itself is pretty much as if it's factory new, but at the same time I have to say I like it quite a lot. I'm not too into chipping, so I think for the moment this will be more or less the look I will be going for with the first units of my army. After having finished the Landraider, I decided that I needed a little color change. So I went around and started working on my Dark Vengeance miniset. And there started out with the Tactical Squad. In terms of the color scheme, I very much tried to follow the advices of Buy Painted that he showed in his tutorials, because they looked absolutely stunning and amazing in his video. So I tried to go along his suggestions and try my best to recreate it as good as I can. The minis itself, from the pose and the building, I have to say I really enjoyed. Yes, they didn't offer me a lot of options on how to put them together and or how to pose them, but for me personally, as someone who doesn't pose a lot or doesn't pose his models a lot, that's pretty fine. So I'm not too worried about it. And yeah, the details that they put on it, quite astonishing how they got it onto their small models. But I have to say also that the finished paint job I really like. The greens are very vibrant. Darker parts are slightly darker on the models, so it worked out pretty good. Even the red and the highlights in orange worked very nicely. Where possible, I even tried to mimic going the sword in metals while doing the hilt in golds. Might not come out properly, but in real life they're looking very nice. My biggest problem still here is the sergeant. I use the standard head at the moment, but I'm seriously considering to just chop him off and replace him with a standard helmet, so that I don't have to look at the paint job again, because I really didn't do it any justice. But at the same time I'm having real problems of getting a good face onto such a small piece of work. So I hope you liked the second update. If you have any tips, tricks, hints and guides, please just post it. And besides this, hate if you like, unsubscribe if you want, and enjoy the day.